Uh, yes, old Kona Brewing Company. I actually grew up in Kailua, Kona, on the Big Island of Hawaii, and so the friendly local game store that I used to go to was actually right across the parking lot from the Kona Brewery. Um, it's kind of difficult to find Kona brews outside of Hawaii. I mean, mostly on the West Coast, California and Washington, Oregon, and that sort of thing. You can find them distributed out there, but I was lucky that I found a distributor, I guess, that delivers as far inland as Texas. So if you live in the South and you have Tom Thumb chain of stores, check out their beer and wine section, and that's the only place I've been able to find Kona brews. See, there you go, right there, Kona Brewing Company, Kailua, Kona, Hawaii. This is a pipeline porter. This is a beer that's brewed with 100% Kona coffee, and I like a number of their brews. My favorite is a seasonal brew that they only do in the spring and the winter. The spring and summer. And they didn't have it in stock, so I went ahead and picked up the pipeline beer. It's very good. This is probably, well, the Kona beers are my favorite, actually. And like I said, there's the Wailua wheat flavor that's brewed with passion fruit. That's my favorite beer of all time. But the pipeline, I think, is my second favorite. It's got a little bit of a hint of coffee flavoring to it, kind of a roasted coffee bean aroma. Delicious. And one of the longest hobbies, well, probably the longest running hobby that I have is video games, actually. And my parents bought me a ColecoVision. I believe I was 4 or 5 years old, and that was my very first video gaming system. And it came with Donkey Kong, and I played the hell out of Donkey Kong. I played hours and hours of that game. There was another game that I had for that ColecoVision too, and I can never remember the name. If anybody knows the name of a game, you were this little biplane, and you were it was like a side-scrolling game, so you were kind of flying from left to right, and you were just you had to move up and down the screen to dodge obstacles, and I played that game almost as much as I played Donkey Kong. I don't remember if I had any other games for the ColecoVision. Shortly after that, I got an Atari 2400. And of course, I played dozens and dozens of games on that. A friend of mine, my neighbor, had an Atari, or 2600. I'm sorry. My neighbor had a 2600, and so I played a lot of games over at his house. And he would come on, he would bring his games over, or I would bring my games over, and so and I even owned and played many times the E.T. video game, which was a terrible, terrible game. It's just god-awful. There's an interesting story that some folks may not know about the E.T. video game, that they actually produced more copies of the video game than there were Ataris in circulation. So, if there were 50,000 Ataris on the market, they produced 60,000 E.T. cartridges. So they ended up with this huge surplus because the game was terrible to begin with. So it sold miserably. And so they ended up with this huge surplus of games, and I heard they basically loaded them onto a dump truck, and they took them out to the middle of the desert somewhere in New Mexico or something, and they just buried them. Yeah, I remember as a kid, I beat that game several times. It wasn't a long game. You could probably beat the game in about 30 minutes. But then most Atari games, most of those early generation video games weren't terribly long affairs. It wasn't really, there was never any kind of story to those video games. It was really just kind of about the challenge. It was about the skill. So it was the motto of those early video games was easy to learn, difficult to master. So, like in Pac-Man fashion, you were playing the same level over and over again, but it just got a little bit harder each time, and so it was just kind of you were running the gauntlet to see how far you could go, before you ran out of lives or whatever. shooting for the high score. But I've been a big video gamer ever since. I am a very avid Nintendo fan, or I was. I'm not so much anymore, but I had just about every Nintendo video game system. My uncle gave me his NES for my 9th or 10th birthday. That was his birthday present to me, was his Nintendo and all the games that he had collected for it thus far. And I played the hell out of those too. Super Mario Brothers is probably still one of my favorite video games of all time. I wasted so many hours on that game. And Contra, the original Contra. My brother and I, we got Contra down to an art. We would do speed runs through the game to see how quickly we could beat the game. I think we got it down to like 19 minutes. I think we beat I think we could go from beginning to end in 19 and a half minutes or something like that. It was crazy. But that was one of the best NES games, I think, in existence. Contra. Oh my god, that game's fucking awesome. But I think in terms of series, the Mario Brothers series really took me and impressed me. From Super Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers 2 was a little bit weak. I remember I rented that one when it came out from the video store. I played it a few times. It was okay, but then of course when Mario Brothers 3 came out, and then everybody was just blown away. I don't know if it's still true, but I know for a long time Mario Brothers 3 held the record for the most copies sold of any video game. The Super Nintendo, and the Super Nintendo to this day is probably my all-time favorite video gaming system. The Super Nintendo was it, man. I was so absorbed into that thing, and I played so many games on it. And I still have my original SNES that I bought back in, I got for Christmas back in 91, maybe it was 90 or 91, whenever it was that it came out. I wanted one so bad that I took all the money that I had gotten as Christmas gifts for Christmas that year, and that's what I bought with it. It wasn't cheap. It was $250. But good times. A kid on YouTube who goes by SNES Man, and he's a really talented guy. I'm going to put a link to his channel down below. He's a talented musician and real cool guy, and he does reviews of Super Nintendo games. Real great guy. I recommend anybody going to check out his channel, even if you never played the Super Nintendo. If you're a bit younger and you're kind of curious about that generation of gaming, I encourage you to go check it out, because there's a lot of really interesting games that go with that era. But yeah, then I don't know. Console video gaming has kind of fallen away for me since then a little bit. I did pick up a Nintendo 64. I never picked up I've never had a PlayStation, PlayStation 2, or PlayStation 3. I don't know what it was about the PlayStation. It never really appealed to me. The button layouts on the controllers, it wasn't A, B, X, and Y anymore. It was square, circle, triangle, and X, and so it would say press triangle to continue, and I'd be like, what the hell? Where the hell is the triangle button on this damn thing? Yeah, that totally threw me for a loop. I think as a result of that, I never really took the time to invest in any of the PlayStation systems, any of the Sony game systems. Plus, I was already following the Nintendo systems, So I did get an N64. That wasn't a very good system. There were only maybe 2 or 3 worthwhile games on it, and the 2 or 3 worthwhile games were the ones that I owned. And then as soon as I had kind of, that had played itself out. As soon as I had beaten those games enough times that I was satisfied with them, and I just sold that system, and I never really looked back to it. I got a GameCube about the time that they were going by the wayside, about the time that the Wii was going to come out. But there were a couple of good games on the GameCube too. Of course, like Resident Evil 4, That was a really awesome game. Metroid Prime 2 and 3 I didn't really like that much, but the first Metroid Prime game was really good. I've got a Wii, and I did buy an Xbox 360, and both of those I kind of bought them later on in their life cycles. And the Wii's not great. It's not. Really, what I find I spend most of my time, money, and energy on the Wii is the Virtual Console, where you buy like the old ROMs of the NES and SNES games. So, yeah, I don't play the Wii for the Wii, really. I just play the Wii for Nintendo and Super Nintendo. Oh, and Sega Genesis. You can get Sega Genesis games on there too, which I thought was really awesome. That's kind of a really weird thing to think about for me, coming from that generation of gaming, the whole Nintendo versus Sega wars. That was a really big thing in the marketing and and everything back in the day. All the advertisement was about, oh, Nintendo doesn't know what they're doing, Sega doesn't know what they're doing, all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's weird. It's weird to me to think about that. Of course, I was kind of an arcader too. I used to go to the arcades back when arcades were, well, back when there were arcades, I guess. I'm sure there's a few of them lingering around now, but it seems like every time I see one, they're really more dedicated to kind of like the shooting games or like the racing games, the ones where you sit down in a chair and you have like a steering wheel, or you have controls or a gun or something like that. But you don't really see many just sort of joystick games in arcades anymore. But I definitely experienced the arcade era, and I would spend a lot of time in the arcades in my younger years, playing stuff like Pac-Man and all that. And then into about the early '90s, I really hit heavy on the fighting game scene, and so I have a deep-seated love and passion for the Street Fighter games, for example. I remember watching people standing in line to play Street Fighter 2 against one another. And, I would do my duty. I'd sit in the back of the line, and I'd go, I'd get my turn to play. I'd get up there, and then I'd play for 30 seconds. I'd get totally trashed, and then I'd jump right back to the back of the line again, waiting to spend my quarters. Street Fighter wasn't the only game that I played. I played Street Fighter 2. I played Mortal Kombat. More so, I played Mortal Kombat 2. That was probably my favorite game of the series. And then Rare came out with Killer Instinct. I used to play a lot of Killer Instinct. A couple other games here and there. I never liked the Virtua Fighter series. I never really liked the Tekken series. I never really cared for most of the Mortal Kombat games after Mortal Kombat 3. Even Mortal Kombat 3 itself was a little too far out there for me. Mortal Kombat 2 was more my realm with that game. That game is, looking back on it, that game's it's not a great game, honestly, but it is novel, for what it was doing at the time. Video games before that, there was no regulation. I mean, that really changed the game. That changed the hobby. Because there was all these concerns. Parents had all these concerns about violence in video games and their kids being exposed to this stuff, and so I remember that being a big deal. So I have a much love for fighting games. Most of them, I've kind of fallen away from most of them, but I still do enjoy. I've gotten back into Street Fighter with Street Fighter 4 in that series, and that's actually a really good game. The running joke was that Capcom couldn't count past 2, because there's Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, Street Fighter 2 Alpha, Street Fighter 2 Alpha 2, Street Fighter 2, and there was like 10 games that were called Street Fighter 2. And so for the longest time, the joke was that Capcom, they could only count to 2. They couldn't go any higher than that. I love video games. I'll probably do a little bit of talking about some video games on my channel. I didn't even get into PC games. Gosh, my PC era. Maybe I'll save that one for another time. Yeah, the mid to late 90s and then into the first couple of years of the 2000s was a really good era for PC gaming for me. Anyway, thanks for sharing a beer with me. I This is the first beer. Honestly, this is the first beer that I've had in 2012, and I'm not a heavy drinker. If anything, like Hammered said, I'll sip a beer here and there, and that's about it. And so, but any excuse to drink a beer, especially a fine Kona beer. And this one's really good. This is, like I said, this is probably my second favorite beer of all time because the coffee flavor blends beautifully with the beer. Oh, man. Oh, that's good. So, thanks for listening, guys. I'll talk to you again soon.